Going to get things started. Good morning, everyone. My name's Tara Lanigan. I'm Strategic Partnerships Director here at the Center for Smart Streetscapes. Thank you again for joining. We have a great program and speakers today, which I'll dive into after some housekeeping. So if you're not familiar with the Center for Smart Streetscapes, or CS3, we are an NSF-funded research center based at Columbia with core partners at Rutgers, Lehman College, and Florida Atlantic. We focus mainly on how smart city technologies and digital infrastructure can make our streets safer, more efficient, and more livable. And our researchers work on everything from connectivity and situational awareness to privacy, governance, public interest tech. And we test these ideas in the real world through our urban test beds, as well as an accelerator program and partnerships that turn research into impact. So our center's work really lives at the intersection of technology, policy, and community. And one of the clearest examples of that is how we're starting to think about AI in public safety. So at CS3, we see AI as a tool that can make our streets safer and more livable, like our mission strives for. Whether that's understanding how people move through public space, helping cities respond faster to emergencies, or designing infrastructure that adapts to community needs. But we also know that with those opportunities come really big questions around privacy, transparency, and trust. So for today's conversation, we're going to start with presentations to ground the discussion on this. So starting with Jorge Ortiz from Rutgers, who will frame sort of the research and ethics side with an overview of CityOS and the new Center on Responsible AI and Governance. Then Paul Rothman, director of New York Smart City Testbed Program, will share how the city is tackling these challenges through pilots. And Sanjay Bhakta will wrap up with insights from Centific's transit agency collaborations using AI for anomaly detection. And then during the second half of the webinar, Professor Henning Schulzrinne from Columbia will moderate a discussion on how all of their perspectives connect. With about 10 minutes left, we'll open things up for audience Q&A using the chat box, but I'll be moderating the chat throughout, so please put your questions into the chat at any time. And with that, I'd like to introduce Jorge Ortiz, who is an associate professor of electrical and computer engineering at Rutgers University. He serves as site director and PI for CRAIG, the NSF Center on Responsible AI and Governance, and a PI for CS3 as well. He also directs the Sensing and Reasoning Lab at Rutgers University. Jorge, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much. So today I'm going to give a brief overview of CityOS, which is a privacy-first architecture for citywide sensing systems. And then I'm going to give an overview of the Center for Responsible AI and Governance and why there's a natural partnership between what we're doing in CS3 and the objectives of the center, and how CityOS sort of bridges that discussion. But before I dive into the details of CityOS, I wanted to mention that, when engineers build systems, there's implicitly a trust that the public is placing in engineers, whether that's consciously done or not. And to frame the motivation for CityOS, CityOS is the objective was to make that trust explicit. What we're saying when we designed CityOS is, yes, there is a contract, and we're designing a system around making elements of that contract explicit. So more specifically, we're focused on privacy, accountability, and trust in the system, right? And actually, there's another place where this contract is explicit, and it's on the web. So there's been a lot of work in W3C for providing privacy, protecting your privacy. There's lots of interest in obtaining your data to serve you better ads, but there's been a critical mass, and recently recently a critical activity led by Roxana Gambuso at Columbia, where they enforce privacy budgets on device and instead of relying on outside compliance. So the objective there was, let's instead of relying on outside compliance, let's build the trust. Let's let the browser manage the trust for you. And so in discussions with Roxana and her team, we through CS3, we were trying to essentially take that same idea into the city. Um, Basically, how do we embed a trust broker, if you will, in a physical domain, and then mediate access for applications and the data that's generated by the public through this CityOS infrastructure. And so what we're currently building is again this system that puts nodes out into the street that are collecting this sensor data. And so effectively, they act the way that your browser does. They're collecting local information and allowing applications to obtain access to your data through, mediated through CityOS. There's three kinds of applications, and essentially they're exposed. There's essentially three broad classes of applications that we have categorized, and each of these have different privacy implications, and also they also affect the types of applications that you can build, so the capabilities of the applications. The first one is a reactive API. This is real-time on-scene actuation. There's no privacy implication here. If you're in the intersection and you're providing this data, we're buffering and this has to do with safety and you know providing low latency access to your data, but we let that data drop to the ground once the application sort of consumes it and provides some sort of alert. And here there's a sort of implied contract that you're on the street, you're in a public space, we're trying to provide safety critical applications, and we're just going to need your data at that moment in time, but we won't store any of it. Then there's the local aggregate, and these applications are um, basically, minute scale or multi-minute scale aggregate information about the state of the space. So, for example, we've been building this parking occupancy application to provide guidance for what streets might have parking spots open. And that costs a little bit of your privacy budget. We're sort of accounting for, aggregate statistics over some time horizon, um, with a fixed spatial horizon, and making privacy guarantees within that fixed window. We're also making it explicit to your application how much that's going to cost you from a privacy versus utility trade-off space. And the third one is the federated or cross-locality applications, which go across a city. They essentially provide region scale analytics. And this costs the most in terms of privacy. You may want to get, turn by turn navigation while you're driving in the city. And for that, we need to know who you are, where you are, track you across multiple intersections throughout the city. And of course, that's going to essentially cost you the most. But there's, again, that cost is made explicit as you're engaging with this application, and is only for the time, you have the option to sort of participate or not. And so once although we've started building this system and we're still in the prototyping phase of this, it starts to become a question. It opens up questions about the sort of broader implications of building these applications, right? It becomes more than just an engine, a sort of engineering exercise, but one that involves ethics and law and citizenship. Uh, and so recently we had this center, the Center for Responsible AI and Governance. It was recently funded by the National Science Foundation. And the objective of the center is to precisely dive deep into these questions. And so just to give a little bit of background, about Craig. It's led by Ohio State. I'm the site director for Rutgers. It also involves Baylor and Northeastern, so multiple universities with many disciplines being represented to, again, unpack the implications on society with respect to the questions that CityOS opens up. Some of the overarching themes include, privacy protective and secure AI, like CityOS, fair AI, explainable AI. How do we audit these systems? How do we embed this contract again embed contracts and law and ethics into the design of our systems, into the design of our models? What are good AI governance practices? What are the best practices? How do we align law with AI practice itself? And so these are some of the areas that we're tackling within Craig, and for which CityOS serves as a concrete instance to engage in that discussion. Like CS3, it's also highly multidisciplinary. It involves representation across computer science, law, business, the social sciences, humanity, philosophy, and various disciplines. So with that, that's a quick overview, but again, all of these issues were sort of brought to the fore in the actual through CS3 in creating CityOS, and there's a lot more questions to explore there, which we'll get to talk about here in this panel.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jorge. So next, I would like to introduce Paul Rothman, who has served as the Director of Smart Cities and IoT at the New York City Office of Technology and Innovation since January 2020. And prior to that, Paul was a Senior Product Manager at the Mayor's Office of the CTO, focusing on improving life for New Yorkers through technology. Paul, I will turn it over to you. And you are on mute.
Great, thank you. Just checking you can see everything on full screen.
Looks
Okay,
good.
great. Yeah, thanks. Good to be here. I'm Paul Rothman, Director of our Smart Cities and Internet of Things portfolio here in the Office of Tech and Innovation in New York City. The Office of Tech and Innovation has been around for a few years now, consolidating a number of different technology offices within the city of New York, including, as Tara mentioned, former Mayor's Office of the CTO, Department of Information and IT, 311, our cybersecurity. So a bunch of different groups are kind of pulled into one. And I work in what's a team called Research and Collaboration. And our mission is to promote and support the productive, responsible use of emerging technologies in New York City. We do that through researching trends and topics about proposed uses of emerging technology. We do a lot of collaboration, as is in our name, with agencies about opportunities to pilot new technologies. We do policy and planning. And then, just overall try to work on, future looking technology and working with different city agencies to, test them out in public. So we have a program that we launched called the Smart City Testbed that we launched in 2023. So website, you can check it out at nyc.gov/testbed. It's an open application. So we have an application that we encourage any kind of vendor or even academics to apply to run a pilot with us. We partner applicants with city agencies to be kind of like the stakeholder subject matter experts for those pilots. And so, we really just try to understand what the benefits of an emerging technology will be, how it might potentially, integrate and scale within city agency operations. So we're all about kind of like piloting real world technology, things that are kind of at like a TRL level, like 7 or 8 or above, things that are in market or close to market. And we kind of handle a lot of the project management within OTI, in order to, have our stakeholders focus on goals and outcomes. So thinking about, some of the technologies that we're looking at with related to computer vision and AI, the bulk of what we're working on in the test bed program is related to public realm and the built environment. And so there are a lot of opportunities for utilizing, vision-based technologies. And so we've done a number of pilots. We'll talk about that as well. I'll also note, as Jorge mentioned, kind of AI governance and things like that. We have colleagues within research and collaboration who released also 2 years ago our AI action plan, and there's ongoing work within New York about AI governance and tools for agencies to understand how to use some of these technologies in their operations. But more specifically, that's sort of like the big AI umbrella. But when it comes to computer vision technologies that we're testing, some of the questions that we look at and think about as we test are benefits between, let's say, edge processing versus at the cloud. We've seen that so far, edge processing can provide higher levels of privacy protection because you're not sending video from the device. We're just collecting metadata such as, mobility counting, and we'll go through a couple of other examples there. It also requires lower bandwidth, so we can operate off of, cellular cellular modems and things like that. Doesn't require fiber or other kind of high bandwidth to move the imagery. On the cloud side, we have the option for video access if needed. In some cases, we've done public engagement where, I guess the idea of edge processing is, still new to people. So the idea that you have a camera, but there's no video available. And in some cases, we've heard from the public saying, well, what if you need to check the video? What if an accident happened or something? And so, there are aspects of that where having video might be beneficial. And then also with cloud processing, we can use, lower specification imagery tools, things like, camera phones and cameras on drones or other things like that. And then that processing can happen at the edge. In the cloud. And then also thinking about another question around, existing infrastructure or installing new hardware, with using existing infrastructure, like existing, camera networks and things like that. You've got overall lower costs. So, capital expenses and operational expenses, because these are existing, there's no additional cost there. And then also potential for scalability, that if we already have a network built out of cameras to tap into those, to some degree, that scaling is kind of, that roadmap is already there. But with new hardware, we're able to install in locations. We're not restricted to locations where existing cameras are. So, if a lot of, let's say, we have cameras related to like traffic, those are really focused on like arterials. But let's say, there's information that we're looking to collect on, different types of streets than like highly trafficked streets for traffic management. We have the ability to install, new sensors that can collect information there. We also, think about, privacy concerns and considerations. And I guess, there is, people sort of accept the idea of, there are these camera networks out there, but once you start extracting different information from it, it can sort of change the paradigm and how people think of them. versus something that's just being looked at in the moment versus the new data that's being extracted from these existing networks, and that can change people's considerations for how some of this technology works. And then just to go into a little bit of the pilots, so we've done a pilot using like fixed sensors. These are kind of net new hardware that are doing processing at the edge, so things related to mobility counting, looking at pedestrians, cyclists, cars, trucks, buses. So that's new data that Department of Transportation and other agencies can use to understand how people are getting around. More rich, 24/7 data versus putting somebody out on the sidewalk and counting people for a short period of time. So it gives a lot more insights. We did another pilot around street conditions. So this was mobile imaging. I mentioned before, with kind of like the cloud processing, we were able to use smartphones mounted on the handlebars of bikes going through our protected bike lanes and then processing those images. And you can see, here some of the annotations of cracking, of hardware, things like that. So that's something that we were looking in as well for, kind of street conditions, street safety. We've done a pilot using drones to do facade inspections. So again, kind of using a not connected technology like a drone to collect imagery and do that processing in the cloud. And then similar, we did a project that was using a robot collecting, automating the collection of roof data to look at kind of preventative maintenance for roofs and things like that. So again, that's using a camera on top of a robotic platform and processing that in the edge. And then lastly, we do public engagement for these pilots that we run. And so we try to, keep the idea of responsible use in mind here. We minimize data collection where possible. So a lot of times, the projects that we look at are edge processed imagery, using other kinds of like privacy preserving technologies, like if we are collecting actual imagery that any kind of sensitive information like faces or license plates get automatically blurred in that collection process, and then engaging with the public on the use of the technology. So this is a photo of one of the sessions that we did talking about one of our previous pilots. We actually coincidentally have a public engagement today. We're going to be at the Greenpoint Public Library at 5 o'clock talking about two of our recently wrapped up pilots related to drones and building inspection. So if anybody here wants to join, you're welcome to. And then also there's an image here of a sticker that we put up on the location of one of our air quality research pilots that, if people are noticing equipment up on a light pole, hopefully they can, take a look at this information that we're posting about who's behind the pilot, what we're doing, where they can find information. So that has to do with, transparency about the technology and trying to engage with the public on site. And with that, I will hand it back to Tara.
Great, thank you, Paul. Last but not least is Sanjay Bhakta, who is the Global Head of Solutions at Centific, where he drives business development and solutions in cybersecurity, digital safety, fraud, and security for generative AI, and leads teams of engineers, analysts, and data scientists. So Sanjay, over to you.
Thank you, Tara, and the CS3 team. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be joining from. I'm very much looking forward to our session today, along with fellow panelists, Paul and Jorge, and obviously being led by our moderator, Henning. Centific, we here at Centific are, if you will, everything and anything AI related. It runs through the fabric of who we are, how we think, and we're going to walk through one of our platforms, which is known as Verity AI, and more so in terms of how we're partnering with communities, with agencies, with transportation authorities, really more so, interconnecting all of this amalgamated information, be it through any form of content such as videos, which could be through CCTV cameras. There could be drones, if you will. This may also include law enforcement, such as cameras that law enforcement personnel may be garnering as well as utilizing. And in addition to that, content which is not necessarily video related, right? It could also be audio, IoT sensors and LiDAR and all sorts of information, which is very beneficial. How is it beneficial? We'll get to that in just a quick moment here. Just a little bit about Centific. We are a global organization. Just a quick preview in terms of some of our locations. Again, global organization. We do focus more so across all of these different teams across the globe. One of the areas that we focus on is public safety. In addition to that is by public safety, that is consisting of what's known as, if you will, smart cities, law enforcement, local city-state governments, agencies, which may be city agencies, as well as federal agencies. In addition, we also work, within hospitality and logistics and transportation. There are other industries that we also focus on. Let's get right into our conversation for today. So, we're going to be speaking more so about some of the opportunities we've had across the globe with cities and agencies. So this is a representation of a trend and a pattern, if you will, that we're seeing really across the globe. And so there's agencies we're working with in North America, as well as in EMEA. And these agencies that I'm referencing, it's a combination of cities, city and state local governments, and, if you will, your transportation authorities. And some of the challenges that we have observed, if you will, especially over the last 18 months, has been really focusing on the need, the sense, the sense of commitment, increasing, elevating trust, in communities. Obviously, the more trust there is with communities, that are traveling to and from, that are utilizing either transportation or pedestrians, those who are actually, within the ecosystem of, many of the smart cities across the globe, there is an elevated sense of improving and increasing safety for the public. And obviously this has a significant number of benefits, for the cities themselves. Obviously, the safer cities are, the safer transportation is, the more information, that cities have at their disposal, such as, if we look at building permits, if you will, and, utilizing drones to help comprehend coding enforcements and things such as that. Any sort of usage of technology, as their Marvel quotes, obviously with greater sense of power comes a greater sense of responsibility. So there is, hence, when we talk about responsible and ethical AI, there are challenges, similar set of challenges across the globe of how to actually go about the AI governance aspects, in context to challenges that many cities face, such as being able to comprehend that an event is actually occurring versus an event that's about to occur. What are some of the leading indicators, patterns, that we may be able to recognize, which may not be readily apparent, to the average individual or the average commuter, or the average visitor to a city, and where is all this information coming from, right? Again, we were talking about CCTV cameras, traffic cameras, the drones, if you will, IoT sensors, being able to understand, if you will, be it temperature or traffic and crowd monitoring, right? And then when we reference LiDAR, being able to understand, if you will, distribution, of either what's known as objects of interest or people or a person of interest. All of these, are coming in all shapes and sizes across the globe. The interesting aspect is that there are common patterns, of these challenges across the globe. So, we've had the opportunity to partner, with cities, with agencies, with transportation authorities, with entities, governmental entities, if you will, to be able to help improve, if you will, the safety aspects and the benefits that we're mentioning. Not only an increasing sense of safety, but also elevating, increasing the amount of trust that communities have. And the benefits obviously are not just the safety aspects, but also a potential increase in revenue, revenue for cities, for for businesses that happen to be within that specific area, within the cities. There's also the operational gains, right? The operational efficiencies, operational excellence, if you will. So from all the different challenges that we just spoke about, we've had the opportunity to ingest content in the formats that I've just mentioned. So when it comes to videos, so there's a combination of the audio and the video. So videos, courtesy of traffic cameras, CCTV cameras that are placed around the city, throughout the city. There is also, the ability, to understand and detect, different types of vehicles, license plates, if you will. Again, the objective of understanding is really to help address and understand, is there or are there potential behaviors, patterns, which may, lead us to believe that there's a potential set of anomalies where there may be an area, potential area of concern, or something that may be about to occur, and an early warning, related to that. So a couple of more succinct, use cases. One is related to group behavior, being able to monitor crowds and what's known as the crowd monitoring, if you will. So as individuals are either congregating or the typical like traffic flow, the typical crowd flow, what is typical, be it directionality, be it, if you will, specific outliers, where a crowd is, if you will, congregating, but the flow of the crowd is moving in a certain direction, and it's moving in that direction, which is normal because it is a Monday or a Friday or a Sunday, and it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, versus 2 o'clock in the morning. Understanding those behavioral patterns, time of day, is obviously critical, and the season, and the day of the week. We've had the ability to take into consideration all this sort of information, again, courtesy of video. Then there's also the audio aspects, which is translating frequencies. So whether it be machinery or vehicular, or, if you will, what's a potential of objects of interest, where there are different types of objects that that are emitting different sounds and the frequency related to those objects. There is also the language translation, multilingual, spoken. So if there happens to be in terms of an agency official who is having either a discussion or there is a potential of concern with perhaps either a crowd or a group of individuals, to which, an agency official may be having a conversation, being able to interpret the spoken along with the tone in conjunction with environmental, if you will, frequencies. So the environmental is really the frequencies of objects, if you will, the frequencies of everything that is non-human, and interpreting that. So we've had the ability to interpret, the audio, which is the human audio, which is the language, the environmental noises, if you will, or frequencies of objects, along with video. And we have correlated all of that information, with different types of documentation in terms of what cities, what agencies have, as what constitutes, normal behavior or a traffic flow or crowd flow during different times of the day, different days of the week, the month, the different seasons, along with events, that are happening, whether there happens to be a concert or stadium is nearby, and there's a certain teams happen to be either visiting with a home team that happen to be playing. All of these things are taken into consideration in order for then us to provide some form of insights, some form of intelligence. That some form is to now understand the group behavior, understand is there a potential where somebody has left something behind, either intentional or unintentional, which is the unattended. And then obviously, if there's an object of interest, something where there may be an intent to be able to, it could be to inflict harm, it could be, just an intent to create, some form of ill will, if you will. So we've used this information, used all this different content, ingested this through our Verity AI platform. There are different sorts of models, if you will, courtesy of many foundational providers, such as NVIDIA, and we take all this learnings related to foundational models. We've contextualized the different behaviors. We've contextualized in these different environments by behaviors. We've had the opportunity, to work with different disciplines. So there is legal counsel with whom we've had the opportunity to work with, along with psychologists, along with medical practitioners, if you will, first responders, and understanding, the things that they see, what they understand, what they hear, and we've codified all of these different, so-called patterns, and have gone through different iterations of training to be able to recognize, when something is about to occur. So when we look at the results, if you will, there are many of the larger cities in the across the globe. We're working, with many of them that have multiple either locations. They have many stations. They it's a combination of buses and trains and different forms of public transportation. Also, if you will, the port authorities, if they're located obviously near the sea, we have been able to at least accelerate, any form of, potential concern. On average, it's more than 22 times faster. And based off of what we're able to see, the early warnings, early signs, if you will, to be able to now notify the respective personnel. Now, that's one aspect. The other is not just notifying personnel, but when we look at like a preventative maintenance, because we see either crowd behavior or a congregation or the positioning of certain types of vehicle, be it vehicular or public transportation, the weight may be abnormal. So we're understanding, courtesy of IoT sensors, what's the weight distribution, to be able to, also include notifications of, the potential for earlier maintenance, hence, the predictive maintenance aspects. So we've seen all sorts of results, at least for many agencies across the world. Here's just a quick, preview. Everything, within and how we think is agentic AI in nature, if you will. So there are, there's a multitude of AI agents that are all working together, to understand from different perspectives, whether it's for first responder or for public safety, or if we're looking at specific cities, where there's a concern related to border protection. We also correlate this with online activity and online behavior. So such as the dark web, and understanding what's happening in the dark web, and taking all that information, it's being absorbed by a multitude of agents. And I'm going to then, before I turn it over to Tara, just a quick very high level, just in terms of the outcome, based agentic AI. When we look at, AI agents, and obviously that's more than, the trend, as we're also observing. Again, with great power comes great responsibility. The AI governance aspect is essential, especially when it comes to agents, right? It's multifold when we look at agentic AI. So this is just a brief example, if you will, of the agents that we have. Just a brief description, where they're providing specific total visibility, and then when we look at just the value that they're unlocking, for be it for the public sector, and also beneficial to enterprises and the private sector. So I will turn it back over to Tara.
Thank you so much, Sanjay, as well as Jorge and Paul, for giving us a great foundation for a discussion. I'd like to introduce Henning Schulzrinne, who is a professor in the departments of computer science and electrical engineering at Columbia University and broadband advisor at NTIA. He's also previously advisor to the FCC on public safety. So Henning, I'll let you kick off what I know might be a pretty short discussion, but I think still lively and has a great foundation in the presentations from the first part of the webinar. So I'll hand it over to you for the next 15 minutes or so.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentations that illuminated quite a broad set of opportunities and maybe also public perception challenges. So I wanted to focus on maybe one common theme that I observed as I listened to the presentations, namely the underlying issue of trust. We all know that public institutions, from public health to education, have been facing an issue of trust, particularly loss of trust in traditional kind of expert either entities or agencies that have mediated between government or nonprofits and the public at large, and provided a set of guidelines as well as a set of entities that were expected to keep the expectations and interests of the public at large in mind. So I wonder for each of you as to how would you see that beyond just maybe just the technology part, how can you foster, increase that level of trust in that? Particularly since even relying on technical ones like the CityOS example that mentioned, the outside entity, the public, or critical elements of the public have to believe that you're actually implementing that correctly, and indeed not have side channels that leak information beyond what's being disclosed in, say, a PowerPoint presentation or a public document. So I'm curious what thoughts you have on ensuring, or maybe restoring in some cases, the notion of public trust in those deployed infrastructures that often serve multiple purposes. So I don't know who wants to start first.
I guess I'll go first, because I had some thoughts as you were explaining this idea of trust. I think that there's three elements to trust as I've seen it through our engagement on this project in CS3 and several projects that we've worked on. The first one, I think, is education. So this whole idea of bringing in folks from the public to literally sit in a room together with the engineers and the scientists on the project and describe concerns and educate them on what we want to do, and them to educate us about what those concerns are, builds trust with the community. I think just naturally being co-located and in person and sharing that space, and then teaching each other with that openness builds that trust. And also education about the approach that we're taking and the rationale for why we're taking that approach. I think the second aspect of this is transparency. So, maybe it could be in technical transparency, but it could also just It could also be to make that engagement periodic, right? So you're constantly keeping the public informed on what you're doing. You're putting out reports and you're engaging with them in a physical space. And the last one is auditability, which it's an open question and a lot of in machine learning, for example, of is the model actually doing what we anticipate? Is it finding the real pattern, or is it not? And is the system behaving with the promises that you made about what the system would be doing? And so we have to think, I think, very, very deeply about that last one specifically. Because again, there's a lot of open questions there with respect to at least providing technical auditability. But again, I think in that if you handle these three, I think you go a long ways into building that trust.
Okay, thank you. Paul, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, I think obviously the trust component is very important, and that that trust can be a fragile thing as well. So I think when we look at these projects on the transparency side, it's important to say what you're doing, but then also follow that up by doing what you say. And so I think we've seen projects and reports from different places where, let's say, there's a technology that's being deployed for X purpose, and then it ends up also being used for Y because it was expedient. And that's something that can break trust. And so I think that it's really important to if there are modifications or anything to a project or a technology, that's also communicated out. Our process, because we are piloting and trying to kind of educate ourselves sort of quickly, we save that public engagement towards the end of the process. Once we've gathered learnings and once we've done something, we kind of share that out, and then that will feed into an evaluation that we do internally for agencies who are interested in the technology to kind of get a sense of public perception, but then do more kind of engagement before something is scaled, right? And then that might also include doing a risk assessment or something along those lines. So all of the possibilities of how a technology might be used are laid out clearly. And so that helps to build trust. That helps both the city and the public be on the same page about what the intentions are and what the outcomes could be. And so yeah, I mean, I think that's an important component, and because once you lose that trust, it's hard to build it back.
Yeah. Sanjay, I know you wanted to add something.
Sure. We view, I would say, ethics and responsible AI from, if you will, from a combination of standards based along with frameworks. So just as the example, and we've codified all of this within our platform, if you will. So before we look at any specific set of challenges to address, we begin, if you will, and align with ISO standards. So there is the ISO 42001 standard, which is the AI lifecycle. It begins with the what's known as the Inspire. Then there's the design and develop. There's a verification, validation, a deployment, operation and monitoring, reevaluate, retirement. These are the primary stages when it comes to the ISO, according to ISO's definition. This is in the 42001, as well as the risk-based, which is the ISO 22989. So we look at this from the following dimensions. One is standards-based, which is ISO. The second is, from the NIST AI-RMF, we've taken that obviously into consideration significantly, which is known as the govern, map, measure, manage, these different phases. We've interwoven these frameworks with specific principles. So there is OECD's value-based principle, such as transparency and explainability, robustness, security, safety, accountability, human rights. Subsequently, there's a reason why I'm mentioning all of these, is these are the foundations, if you will. There's also UNESCO's human rights approach to AI, which is really more of the trustworthy AI. And then finally, there is IEEE, IEEE's ethically aligned design. We've incorporated, all of these different aspects, if you will, across that entire AI lifecycle, which then helps us understand, okay, based off of the challenge at hand, what could the potential impact, to society be? So the impacts, could be measurable via what's known as the DPIA, which is the Data Protection Impact Assessment. There is an algorithmic impact assessment. There is a trustworthy, if you will, impact assessment. So we look at, all of these dimensions through the entire AI lifecycle to then understand, obviously, based on challenges at hand, how are they, if you will, measurable from a risk perspective? Take a risk-based approach, kind of like taking the EU AI Act's approach of risk-based, to then understand, what level of transparency, robustness, security. Then we go through a complete selection process. What are the best models, if you will, what's the best approach, and ensure that it's multidisciplinary. Those who are on the team, we ensure that they're ethically, it's a fair representation, to mitigate bias. As the example, every team, we ensure that there is diversity, within the team. There is a good demographic representation within the team. So we look at all of these different dimensions to ensure that there isn't any bias with labeling, right? There isn't bias related to model selection. There isn't bias related to the training aspects or the selection aspects. So there's model cards, data sheets, and we, have highly codified all these different aspects that's measurable to understand, okay, have we taken into consideration the transparency aspects? Do we understand, any risks, potential to humanity, human rights? And then there's decisions that come after that, is, okay, let us address, these specific models, from this specific facet, so that we elevate and increase, the safety aspects. And we look at security as well. So that's the approach that we've interwoven within every, every challenge that we address. Hopefully that makes sense.
Thank you. Tara, I don't know if you, since we are down to 5 minutes, if you wanted to open up the floor to questions from the audience.
I'm not seeing any in the chat, so if you want to close out with one more sure. Discussion question, Henning.
Yep, and so the two kind of core issues that I see, like I said, the first one is the trust issue. How do you maintain or restore, in some cases, that one? And the second one, which I think has been a lot of concern in the AI space in general, is the return on investment for particularly city agencies that are always strapped for resources and have to decide whether to pave a road using a century-old technology or to pay for AI technology to measure that road occupancy, for example. So I'm curious from all of your perspectives as to, have you seen successful efforts that actually illustrate that these particularly AI-driven efforts have a real return, not both to, say, the city or transit agency in this example, or to public safety, in ways that can be quantified and that might actually lead to the perception that these efforts are worthwhile beyond just not that they don't do any harm, that they actually cause real good, besides just providing more data that then sits somewhere in a database waiting to be analyzed and indicating that street needs to be repaved, except there's no money to actually do the repaving.
I could begin this time, I think, just in maybe a minute or less. So really quick, the short answer is ROI is it's a very interesting dynamic. It's ideal to dissect, the ROI to be measured. So when we look at ROI, we recommend measuring it from a risk perspective, right? Which is, what is the amount of risk, that is reduced. And that's measurable based off of, if you will, the specific metrics, such as, if we look at, okay, there's a fair amount of, challenges that happen to occur in a specific part of a city. So now, there happens to be, some form of collection, right? Statistical analysis related to a specific geography to which we correlate. Is it just a one time? Is it an outlier? Or, further reinforcement of there really is a challenge. Based off of that, right, there's different vectors that we look at. One of them is risk. Then the other is, if you will, time, right? So based off of reducing time, based off of reducing risk, is this giving back time, for commuters? Is this giving back time for the residents, right? Is it improving things? The third dimension or vector that we look at is value. And by value, when we talk about ROI, is there value, meaning are we improving operational efficiencies, for a city because of, again, historical, taking into consideration different like seasonality, time series, analysis to say, is this really making an impact, for the city themselves? Is it improving the efficiencies? And then the fourth, along with value, is now, is there revenue enablement, right? Or is the city able to now generate additional revenue because of all of the other vectors, reducing risk, improving the efficiencies? Thank you.
Good. Sure. Paul, anything you'd like to come on? I don't know, particularly from a city perspective, I'd be curious how much you have to justify your existence, so to say,
Sure.
Your funders.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I said, we're still sort of in early days with some of this technology, and so we're kind of going from the pilot phase. I know some projects are starting to see some grant money that they'll be able to deploy this type of computer vision at a bit more scale. So, I think that will help us, down this path to understand about the ROI. The question of whether or not there's money to act is almost a separate question, right? You hope that the data follows with action, but in some cases that's a separate calculus. But I think what the hope is with information at the very least, with having these added insights, you can at least approach things from a triage perspective, where we have more information, we understand the places that are in most need in terms of repairs or maintenance, or street safety redesigns. And so the data helps you make those decisions about where to start. And so I think that's maybe the best we can do to start, without having unlimited resources. But hopefully it will lead to a strong ROI in terms of being able to enact smart choices about where we're putting our resources.
Okay, thank you. I think we've reached the end of our time, unless Tara gives George overtime.
One last comment is the perception and improvement in quality of life, and how that might create political will to get things done. I think that's another aspect of this that that we were aiming to hit upon as well.
Great. I think that's a great place to end. So we'll wrap things up there for today. Thank you so much to our speakers for your time today, and to our audience for tuning in. You can find out more about CS3 and how to work with us at cs3-erc.org. And if you'd like to continue this thread, I know there's a lot to talk about. I encourage you to save the date for our 2026 Innovation Summit on February 5th on Columbia's campus, where we'll have more discussions, research showcases, and recruiting opportunities. So you can go to the website listed here or check out the QR code. And with that, have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks all. Great to be here.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.